Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Troll. Troll is exclusively a carry hero, and he can simply be summarized as the best 1v1 carry in the entire game. And basically, as long as Troll is able to right-click enemies, he will most likely delete everything in his path. But in the same way, the strength of Troll is also his weakness. If he can hit, he wins, but if he gets kited, he can feel extremely useless. He's also one of the fastest tower pushers in the game, so if and when he does win a fight, the enemy base will melt if there's no glyph to protect it. But before we can understand how to play Troll, we have to take a look at his abilities. So now that we understand Troll in general, we can take a look at his abilities and see how he's able to be that great 1v1 carry like I talked about. So first, we're going to take a look at Battle Stance, and this is an ability that you don't actually have to put any points into. You get it by default at the start of the game, and all this really does is it switches you from ranged attacks to melee attacks. And so you would probably think, you know, why would I ever want to do that? Ranged is obviously better because you can last hit safer and all that kind of stuff. And yes, in the lane, you might use ranged more, but this actually pairs with this Berserker's Rage ability. It's a passive that you put points into, and it upgrades your ranged and your melee attacks in different ways. So basically, the ranged attacks have a 20% maim chance, as you can see there. That gives attack slow, move slow, and some damage. The damage is obviously pretty nice, but then the big thing, the reason that you actually want to go in melee range is because you get an ensnare chance, which is 20%. So you can see that root that comes out after I hit this axe a bunch, which allows you obviously to keep people in place and hit them more. You also get some armor and move speed, which helps you be a little bit tankier and also keep up with enemies. But if enemies obviously, you know, run away from you, you can quickly switch back to range and hit them a little bit more there. So it's really not that you always want to be in melee, but melee is so good for keeping people in front of you because of that root that it's just way better to be in melee range most of the time when you're actually fighting heroes. But in the laning stage, or if you're sieging a tower or some other things like that, it is good to be in range form some of the time as well. So that's axes, that's Battle Stance, and that's Berserker's Rage. Then next we can take a look at Whirling Axes, which he has a ranged version and a melee version. When you put points into one, you get points in the other one, so they're kind of a combined ability, but you have axes for the ranged version of the hero and the melee version of the hero. So basically, the ranged axes, you just throw them in a direction, and then they do damage, and they also slow the enemy for a short time. And then the Whirling Axes go around you and they do damage in that AoE, and they give a debuff to the enemy that causes them to miss. So this is another reason that you also want to be in melee form a lot of the time when you're fighting enemies, because you can see if I'm in this melee form here, which you can see right there, and I go to throw my axes, it automatically switches me to ranged stance, which you can, yes, switch back, of course, but for the most part, when you're going to fight an enemy, you want to be fighting them, getting those roots off, getting that miss chance on them, and that's really the main focus of the hero, where you can quickly switch to range to slow them down, but then you're probably going to want to switch back to hit them. So that's another reason to go into melee range and how exactly these two things work together. But they also don't really share a cooldown, so you can throw this, run in, and then use this as well. Where in the past, you actually had to switch stances in order to use the axes. And they, I think at one point, shared cooldowns and stuff like that as well. So now, this kind of has been an upgrade for the hero. We can use both of these to nuke people down. You don't necessarily have to switch like back and forth all the time. You can just use this, switch, and then use your melee ones really quickly, and then start attacking people and that kind of stuff. So those are the axes. Good for harassing, good for, you know, farming a little bit, but mainly good in fights to slow people or to give that mischance and do some damage. And then the last normal ability to look at is another passive Fervor, and this basically gives you attack speed with stacks when you attack a single hero or single unit, even a tower. So you can see I have this buff over my head here that says 5, and that's because I kept attacking this axe, and every time I attack him, I get a stack up to 10, and then I attack extremely quickly with Troll here. But then if I switch to this other axe, it resets, and now my attack speed is a lot lower. So this is why Troll really likes to stick on targets, even towers, and you know, you don't really want to switch from attacking a tower to attacking creeps. You want to stick on one target, whether it's a hero or a tower, so you can build up those Fervor stacks, so you can have way more attack speed and do a lot of damage. And this is what helps him take towers extremely quickly as well. But it's also what helps him stick on targets, because once you have these max stacks and you're in melee range, that's just going to allow you to like permanently root people for a very, very long time. So that's why this hero is so good at 1v1ing heroes, because you're causing them to miss. you are rooting them in place, and you're building up these attack speed stacks that just make you do so much damage, and you attack pretty much faster than a lot of other heroes in the game, and you just have great 1v1 potential. But you don't really like to switch targets, because if they end up getting away, getting saved, then you have to switch to another target and build up all that attack speed again. So you can see how that kind of makes this hero very, very susceptible to being kited. Then lastly, we can look at his ultimate, which is Battle Trance. And this ability, you click it and you go into this kind of uncontrollable frenzy. You get lifesteal, attack speed, and movement speed, but you're forced to attack the closest enemy target, and you kind of just run at them. So honestly, this can put you in some sticky situations where you just run into the enemy and then eventually die. And you actually can't really die during the duration of this ultimate. So you can see this here. I'll have this axe attack, and you can see no matter how low I get, I don't die. Now, actually, funny enough, Axe's ultimate does cut through that ultimate of the troll. It's one of the only things that does that, so just be wary of that. But for the most part, this hero doesn't really die when you click your ultimate, and you get that lifesteal and movement speed and all that kind of stuff, and usually you can stick on targets with the root and all that, so there's a good chance that you can get a lot of lifesteal and actually survive, but it will put you in bad situations sometimes, so just be aware of that. Also, when you do press your ultimate, you can't really change targets here. You can press BKB, you can press axes and all that kind of stuff, but just be wary that you're a little bit uncontrollable. So it's kind of a negative in some aspects, like I said, obviously putting yourself in bad situations, but just be aware of that. You don't want to use it just anytime, but you do want to use it to kill people really quick, or once the fight has started, everything's committed, you can just then go in and do a ton of damage and, run after people and root them and all that kind of stuff. Then lastly, we can take a look at the Ags and the Shard. So the Shard basically just allows you to randomly throw out axes as you build up fervor stacks. So you can just think of it as a damage increase, so it's pretty good for that. And then the Ags Scepter here is really good for when you're getting kited, either defensively or offensively, basically from slows or from Glimmer Capes and Ghost Scepters and stuff like that. So if the Ags, or if the Axe puts a debuff that slows you, then you can use the melee axes to get rid of those debuffs. Or if this one here uses Ghost Scepter and now you can't attack them, you can use the ranged axes to get rid of that. So it's a really, really good ability for any kind of kiting. It just makes this hero a lot harder to kite, but you can still get stunned and all that kind of stuff. It's also really, really good for farming because it does decrease the cooldown on these abilities. So sometimes this hero actually buys Ags instead of other farming items, or even in concert with those farming items to really, really speed up his farm. That is sometimes the build for this hero. Then as for this hero's passive and facets, basically we already looked at the passive because this is the thing that allows you to switch from melee to range. It's kind of built in and what gives you this battle stance ability from minute 0 without actually having to put points into it. So that's the passive. And then the facets, we have Insensitive, which basically gives you more armor per fervor stack if you want that, which just gets you tankier. But for now, people are picking this one because this one gives you more attack speed or unlimited attack speed based on your fervor stacks, and also gives your allied heroes 50% of that attack speed bonus, which is really, really good in general for just doing more damage, taking buildings faster, all that kind of stuff. And this is generally what this hero wants, because you want to lock people down, you want to permanently root them, you just want to build up those fervor stacks and get all that attack speed, because this hero is really all about the attack speed. So those are the facets and passive. And now that we understand Troll's abilities, we can take a look at how to play him in a game. So Troll's laning stage is really all about using axes to harass and secure last hits. His ranged axes are best for securing range creeps, harassing the enemy, and slowing them either defensively or aggressively, but melee axes are really, really good for pushing the wave, harassing, or chasing enemy heroes down, because you do get more move speed, and you can potentially root them in place to secure those kills. And then the other aspect of Troll's laning stage is switching between melee and ranged form. Ranged is obviously really good for keeping your distance and last hitting safely, while melee is better when you're getting aggressive, like I said, because you have those melee axes and you're trying to kill and you want to get those stuns or those roots to keep the enemy in place, but it also gets you a little bit more tanky when you are taking harass damage. So sometimes, even though you're ranged and you're hitting enemy creeps, if the enemy is hitting you and you're not trying to hit any creeps, it is good to switch to melee form just for that little bit of extra armor and extra sustain so you don't take as much damage. Then when you hit 6, Troll's ult can be a good timing spell to get kills, but it's not always that. Sometimes it's really something that just lets you get out of jail for free or allows you to survive a little bit longer if the enemy's ganking you. Yes, you can use it to get aggressive. Yes, you can kill the offlane or support or those kinds of things, but sometimes you want to keep it in your back pocket, kind of like a Medusa, focus on farming, and if the enemy goes on you, that's when you can press your ultimate, buy a little time for your allies to come and help you. Then transitioning out of the laning stage into the mid game, Troll focuses more on farming than participating for the most part. He usually buys something like a Battle Fury or a Maelstrom, at the very least something like Ags, and then he eventually needs BKB to fight. He's one of the most reliant BKB heroes in the entire game because as we saw with his ultimate, you kind of are uncontrollable and you just have to have BKB, otherwise you're going to get stunned, you're going to get uled, you're going to get disarmed. All these things are going to happen to try to take you out of the fight while you're ulted, or just in general, and so you need BKB to fight. Before that, you can participate. Like, you can show up to a fight late, spam some axes, hit some heroes a little bit, but you definitely don't want to be in front, you don't want to be focused, you don't want to be initiated on, and you can even follow up after the fight is over to maybe push a tower with your team, because you do build up stacks and attack speed, and you can take towers relatively quickly early on in the game, but you really want to focus on those item timings, and BKB is such an important item timing for this hero. Then, in the ideal game, Troll gets his item timings, takes Roche, and then sieges all the buildings while his allies sit in the back behind him and wait for the enemy to initiate, and then they can counter-initiate, you can kill a bunch of people, and they have to commit a lot to killing your first life, and then you have BKB and ultimate and all this other stuff in your second life to really own the fight and delete the enemies. But it is one of those things where if you're having a bad game, you do need to kind of rely on your teammates because you don't like sitting in front, you don't like getting initiated on. Sometimes you can actually be burst full to zero if they have a lot of stuns, or you can get baited into using your BKB, using your ultimate at a bad time, where the enemy ends up just running away. So you are sometimes very reliant on your team to not get caught out and killed before, you can do anything about it, or for them to initiate, stun, cause some chaos in the fight so that you can end up following up on that with your roots and with your ultimate and all that kind of stuff, because you don't really want to rely on your roots as the way to lock people down initially. Like, you can get in there, you can do a ton of damage, but you do somewhat rely on your teammates to coordinate around that. So that can be difficult in certain kinds of games where you're not having the best game, you're a little bit behind, or the matchups are really bad for Troll. And this is why Troll has a playstyle that is very feast or famine. He can either seem like an unstoppable beast that's like the best hero in Dota, or he can seem completely ineffective and useless. And this has a lot to do with how well your early game goes and if you can hit those item timings and get Roche and stuff like that. Or it also has to do with how the matchups work and how the team compositions work, because a lot of times you want people on your team that can cause a lot of chaos. Yes, you can be in front, yes, you can be tanky, but unless you're having an amazing game, you want other people to be able to lock down those mobility heroes so they don't keep zipping around, jumping in and out, and avoiding you. You also have to be careful and know when to buy certain items and when to pop certain items. So a key is obviously, when do you buy Ags? Do you really need the Ags to dispel a lot of stuff, or is the Ags kind of useless because you're just getting chain stunned? It's a lot of stuns, it's not a lot of slows or kiting in that way. And when do you pop ult? When do you pop BKB? These are probably the two most important things to consider on this hero, because once you have BKB and you have ultimate, you are a beast. Once those things are down and you don't have them, you're a lot weaker and a lot easier to kite. So you really don't want to get caught out or baited into using one of these abilities when it's not necessary. You need to use them after the fight is kind of already happening, already engaged, and the enemy is committed. You don't want to be popping them randomly, and that can take a lot of, time and experience knowing when to use the hero to its utmost ability, to its most effective, because you also don't want to keep these things in your back pocket and then get bursted down and chain stunned and killed. So that is why it's very important to understand the limits of the hero and play that fine line, and also play around your teammates and the composition in each matchup, and that's what makes this hero relatively difficult to play. And that, everyone, is my Troll guide. If you liked the video or found it helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.